Sarah Chen was only 16, but her emerald eyes held secrets that even the most prestigious physics laboratories would kill to discover. When Dr. Harrison challenged her to solve an impossible quantum mechanics equation in front of the whole class, he thought he was finally putting the arrogant prodigy in her place. He had no idea he was about to witness something that would shake the very foundations of modern physics. The autumn wind whispered through the broken window blinds of Sarah's cramped bedroom, rustling the papers scattered across her desk. Her slender fingers moved swiftly across a worn notebook, filling page after page with complex calculations that would make graduate students' heads spin. The soft glow of her desk lamp cast shadows on the walls, where faded posters of Einstein and Feynman hung next to her own hand-drawn diagrams of quantum field theories. A small digital clock on her nightstand blinked 11:42 p.m., but time had lost all meaning as she delved deeper into her calculations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah tucked a strand of jet black hair behind her ear, her eyes never leaving the equation she was working on. At 16, she should have been worried about prom dates or college applications, but her mind operated in a different realm entirely. While other teens scrolled through social media, she found peace in the elegant dance of quantum particles and the mysterious symmetries of the universe. Her notebooks, dozens of them stacked neatly in a corner, told the story of a mind far beyond her years, each page filled with insights that could revolutionize our understanding of the universe. The sounds of arguing drifted up from downstairs, her parents' voices growing louder with each passing moment. "You're never home anymore." Her mother's voice cracked with emotion. "These double shifts at the hospital are killing us." Her father's exhausted reply followed. "Someone has to pay the bills, May." You know how expensive her special classes are. The guilt weighed heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She knew every extra physics course, every advanced textbook, every specialized program came at a price her parents could barely afford. Sarah's grip tightened on her pencil, the wood creaking under the pressure. Her room, though small, was her sanctuary, a place where the chaos of their financial struggles couldn't touch the pristine order of mathematical truth. The walls were covered not just with physics posters, but with her own theoretical work, whiteboards filled with equations, sticky notes connecting different concepts, and papers containing her latest breakthroughs. To anyone else, it might have looked like the work of a mad scientist, but to Sarah, it was a map of the universe's deepest secrets. She knew they were struggling to support her advanced physics courses at the local university, but it was the only place that could challenge her mind. Public high school physics had become elementary to her by age 12, and even the accelerated programs couldn't keep up with the theories developing in her head. Her current project, a theoretical framework that could potentially unite quantum mechanics and gravity, consumed her every waking moment. A door slammed downstairs, making her wince. Sarah turned to the large whiteboard mounted on her wall, covered in her latest theoretical work. She'd discovered what she believed to be an error in the standard model of particle physics 3 months ago, but every time she tried to share her findings with her high school physics teacher, Dr. Harrison, he dismissed her as a show-off who needed to learn her place. His words still echoed in her mind, each dismissal adding another crack to her already fragile confidence. The memory of their last interaction made her stomach tighten. "Miss Chen," he had said, his voice dripping with condescension, "perhaps you should master basic physics before attempting to correct established theories." The class had snickered, and Sarah had shrunk into her seat, her groundbreaking calculations burning a hole in her notebook. She could still feel the heat of embarrassment on her cheeks, the sting of tears she refused to let fall. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had finally completed the mathematical proof that would validate her theory. Tomorrow, she would try one last time to show Dr. Harrison her work, not for recognition, not for praise, but because she genuinely believed her discovery could help advance the field she loved so deeply. Her fingers traced the equations, each symbol a piece of a puzzle that had consumed her for months. Sarah glanced at the college rejection letters piled on her desk, their formal language barely masking their skepticism. Despite her extraordinary abilities, No university would accept a 16-year-old high school junior, not without someone believing in her potential. She needed Dr. Harrison's recommendation, but more than that, she needed someone to finally see her for who she really was. The rejection letters seemed to mock her dreams, each one a reminder of the barriers she faced. The sound of glass shattering downstairs jolted her from her thoughts. More arguing about money, about her future, about the sacrifices they were all making. Sarah turned back to her equations, losing herself in the elegant mathematics that made so much more sense than the chaos of her daily life. In the margins of her notebook, she wrote a small note to herself. Tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow they'll understand. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, betraying the anxiety that lurked beneath her determined exterior. On her desk sat a framed photo of her younger self, age 8, proudly holding up her first physics textbook. Next to it, a more recent picture showed her receiving an award at a regional science fair, an achievement that had meant the world to her, but had barely registered with Dr. Harrison. The contrast between the bright-eyed child and the weary teenager she'd become told its own story of dreams confronting reality. As midnight approached, Sarah finally allowed herself to rest. She looked out her window at the starry sky, the same cosmic mysteries she spent her days trying to unravel twinkling back at her. Tomorrow would indeed be different, but not in any way she could have predicted. For in less than 24 hours, Dr. Harrison's attempt to humiliate her would backfire so spectacularly that it would change not only their lives, but potentially the course of modern physics itself. She closed her notebook, unaware that she was about to become part of scientific history. The halls of Preston Academy hummed with the usual morning chaos as Sarah made her way to advanced physics. The prestigious private school, with its Gothic architecture and ivy-covered walls, had offered her a rare scholarship 2 years ago, a decision that both elevated and isolated her. Students in designer clothes parted around her like water around a stone, their conversations about weekend parties and luxury vacations feeling like transmissions from another universe. Sarah clutched her worn notebook closer to her chest, its pages heavy with the theoretical breakthrough she'd completed last night. The familiar smell of chalk dust and aged wood filled the air as she approached room 412, Dr. Harrison's domain. Through the Victorian windows, morning light cast long shadows across the polished floor, creating patterns that reminded her of wave function calculations. "Hey, physics girl." The friendly voice belonged to Marcus Rodriguez, one of the few students who actually talked to her. He was leaning against the wall outside the classroom, his basketball letterman jacket a stark contrast to the calculator protruding from his pocket. "Ready for another thrilling lecture on stuff you probably discovered in kindergarten?" His smile was genuine, free from the sarcasm others usually directed her way. Sarah managed a small smile. "I actually have something important to show Dr. Harrison today." She patted her notebook nervously. "I think I've found something significant about quantum field theory." The words felt heavy in her mouth, carrying the weight of months of solitary work. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "You mean something beyond the whole quantum entanglement proof thing he shut down last month?" He lowered his voice, glancing at the classroom door. "Look, Sarah, maybe you should just, keep it simple today. Harrison's been in a mood ever since the university rejected his research grant." Before Sarah could respond, the sharp click of expensive heels announced the arrival of Amanda Pierce, the school's unofficial queen bee. Her perfectly manicured hand tossed her golden hair as she approached, flanked by her usual entourage. "Oh my God, are you still trying to prove you're smarter than everyone?" Amanda's voice carried just enough for nearby students to snicker. "It's like so sad. Right, Marcus?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, caught between his friendship with Sarah and his position as one of the school's star athletes. "Come on, Amanda, leave it alone," he muttered, but his protest lacked conviction. Sarah felt the familiar sting of betrayal, even though she'd learned to expect it. The imposing figure of Dr. James Harrison appeared in the doorway, his silver-streaked hair and tailored suit projecting an image of academic authority. At 45, he had once been considered a promising physicist himself, but years of teaching high school had left him bitter about his abandoned research career. His steel-gray eyes swept over the gathering of students, lingering for a moment on Sarah with barely concealed disdain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Inside, all of you," he commanded, his British accent crisp and authoritative. "We have a great deal to cover today, assuming there are no unnecessary interruptions." The last words were aimed directly at Sarah, who felt her cheeks burn but kept her head high as she entered the classroom. The physics lab was a blend of old and new. Ancient wooden tables topped with modern scientific equipment, smart boards alongside traditional chalkboards. Sarah took her usual seat in the second row, positioned perfectly to see both the boards and the demonstration area. Around her, other students settled in, their quiet chatter dying down as Dr. Harrison began writing equations on the board. "Today, we'll be discussing quantum mechanics at a level appropriate for high school students," he emphasized the last part with a pointed look at Sarah. "We'll focus on the basics, which some of us would do well to master before attempting more ambitious theories." Sarah's hand instinctively tightened around her notebook. Inside, her breakthrough practically burned to be shared, a potential resolution to the quantum gravity problem that had stumped physicists for decades. But Dr. Harrison's words made her hesitate, the weight of previous rejections heavy on her shoulders. The morning light caught the silver frames of Dr. Harrison's glasses as he turned to face the class. "Now, who can tell me the basic principles of quantum superposition? And please," he added with a tight smile, "let's keep it within the bounds of established physics." Several students glanced at Sarah, expecting her hand to shoot up as usual. But today, she remained still, her mind racing between the desire to share her discovery and the fear of another public dismissal. Her silence seemed to please Dr. Harrison, whose smile grew slightly more genuine as he called on Amanda instead. "Quantum superposition is like when something can be in two states at once, right?" Amanda's answer was basic but correct, earning her an approving nod from Dr. Harrison. Sarah watched as he expanded on Amanda's simple explanation, noting several oversimplifications that made her want to speak up, to clarify, to explore the deeper implications she'd uncovered in her research. The notebook in front of her contained equations that could potentially revolutionize their understanding of quantum mechanics. But here she sat, listening to explanations that barely scratched the surface. Sarah felt like a quantum particle herself, existing in a superposition between the brilliant mind she knew herself to be and the quiet student she was expected to be. Little did she know this tension was about to reach a breaking point. In less than an hour, Dr. Harrison's attempt to maintain his academic authority would collide spectacularly with the reality of Sarah's genius, setting in motion events that would reshape both their futures in ways neither could imagine. Dr. Harrison's chalk scraped across the board as he wrote out a complex quantum mechanics equation, the sound making several students wince. Sarah watched each symbol appear, her heart racing as she noticed a critical error in his derivation. The mistake wasn't just a simple slip. It was fundamental, the kind that could mislead students about the very nature of quantum mechanics. Her fingers drummed silently on her notebook as she debated whether to speak up. The last time she'd corrected him, Dr. Harrison had made her stay after class for a lecture about respecting academic hierarchy. But this wasn't about hierarchy. It was about truth, about the elegance of physics being corrupted by a careless error. "Now," Dr. Harrison turned to face the class, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with a self-satisfied smile. "This equation demonstrates why quantum tunneling occurs at the atomic level. The probability of particle transmission through a potential barrier is clearly shown by—" "Excuse me, Dr. Harrison." Sarah's voice was soft but clear, carrying across the sudden silence of the classroom. Several students held their breath, and Marcus shot her a warning look from across the room. "There's an issue with the equation." Dr. Harrison's chalk stopped mid-stroke, his shoulders tensed visibly beneath his tailored jacket. "Miss Chen," he said without turning around, his accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when he was annoyed. "What have we discussed about interruptions?" "I understand, sir, but the denominator in the wave function is incorrect." Sarah's voice grew stronger, fueled by her genuine concern for scientific accuracy. If we leave it as is, it suggests that quantum tunneling probability increases with barrier height, which contradicts experimental evidence and the fundamental principles of... Enough! Dr. Harrison spun around, his face flushed. The chalk in his hand snapped in two, one piece clattering to the floor. Miss Chen seems to believe she knows more about quantum mechanics than someone with 20 years of teaching experience and a doctorate from Cambridge. Amanda's dramatic whisper carried clearly across the room. God, what a show-off. A few students snickered, but others looked uncomfortable, sensing the growing tension. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she opened her notebook. I can demonstrate why it's wrong. Actually, I've been working on an extended proof that not only corrects this error, but also suggests a new way of understanding quantum barrier penetration. If you'd just look at... Since you're so eager to demonstrate your expertise, Dr. Harrison cut her off, his voice dangerous quiet. Perhaps you'd like to come to the board and explain to the entire class exactly where I've gone wrong. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Show us all how a 16-year-old high school junior knows better than her teacher. The challenge hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Sarah felt every eye in the room on her as she slowly stood up. Her mind raced with calculations and possibilities. This could be her chance to finally share her discoveries, but it could also be another trap, another opportunity for humiliation. Well, Miss Chen, Dr. Harrison gestured to the board with exaggerated politeness. We are all waiting to be enlightened. Sarah walked to the front of the room, her footsteps echoing in the tense silence. The chalk felt foreign in her hand, but the equations in her mind were clear as crystal. She started writing, her movements precise and deliberate. The error begins here, she said, circling a section of Dr. Harrison's equation. The wave function's decay rate in the classical forbidden region doesn't account for the proper energy dependence. If we correct this... Her chalk moved swiftly, filling the board with elegant mathematics. Dr. Harrison's face darkened as he watched her work. Miss Chen, this is far beyond the scope of our class discussion. You're only confusing your classmates with this unnecessary complexity. But Sarah couldn't stop now. The equations flowed from her like a language she'd been born speaking. Actually, this leads to something incredible. See, if we extend this correction, it suggests that quantum tunneling might follow a different probability distribution than we thought. I've been working on a proof that shows... Enough! Dr. Harrison's hand slammed down on his desk, making several students jump. This is exactly the kind of disruptive behavior I've warned you about. You're not here to rewrite physics textbooks, Miss Chen. You're here to learn the curriculum like everyone else. Sarah turned from the board, her chalk still raised. But the curriculum is wrong in this case. The textbook itself has oversimplified these principles to the point of inaccuracy. If we just look at the experimental data from the quantum tunneling experiments at CERN... Return to your seat, Miss Chen. Dr. Harrison's voice was arctic. We'll discuss your behavior after class. But... now. Sarah lowered her chalk, looking at her unfinished work on the board. She'd barely scratched the surface of what she wanted to share, of the breakthrough waiting in her notebook. The walk back to her desk felt endless, punctuated by whispers and stifled laughs. As she sat down, Marcus caught her eye and gave her a sympathetic grimace. Amanda was already typing on her phone, no doubt sharing the latest drama with her social circle. But it was Dr. Harrison's expression that burned into Sarah's memory. Not just anger, but something deeper, something that looked almost like fear. The rest of the class passed in a blur as Dr. Harrison erased her work and returned to his planned lesson. But Sarah barely heard him. Her mind was already racing ahead, knowing that this confrontation was just the beginning. She had tried to play by the rules, to point out the error respectfully. Now she realized a different approach would be needed, one that would force them to see the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made them. Little did she know, her opportunity would come sooner than expected, and it would change everything. The final bell hadn't finished ringing when Dr. Harrison's voice cut through the shuffling of students packing their bags. Miss Chen, a word. It wasn't a request. Sarah remained seated as her classmates filed out, some throwing curious glances over their shoulders. Marcus hesitated at the door, but Sarah gave him a small nod, telling him it was okay to leave. The empty classroom felt suddenly larger, the late morning sun casting long shadows across the polished floor. Dr. Harrison stood by his desk, methodically organizing papers, making Sarah wait. The silence stretched uncomfortably until the last footsteps in the hallway faded away. "Do you enjoy undermining my authority, Miss Chen?" He finally looked up, his gray eyes cold behind his glasses. "Do you get some sort of satisfaction from disrupting my class with your theories?" Sarah gripped the edges of her desk. "That wasn't my intention, Dr. Harrison. The equation was incorrect, and I thought—" "You thought?" He cut her off, moving to lean against the front of his desk. "That's precisely the problem. You think too much, question too much, challenge too much. This isn't some playground for your intellectual fantasies. This is a structured educational environment." The sunlight caught the dust motes floating between them, making them look like tiny stars, a galaxy of particles dancing in the tension. Sarah took a deep breath. "Science progresses through questioning, through challenging accepted ideas. Even Einstein? Don't." Dr. Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare compare yourself to Einstein. You're a 16-year-old girl who's read a few advanced textbooks and now thinks she can revolutionize physics. It's not just arrogant, Miss Chen, it's delusional." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "My work is solid. If you just look at my complete proof—" "Enough." He straightened up, his height towering over her desk. "This ends now. You will not interrupt my class again with your theories. You will not challenge the curriculum. You will sit quietly, take notes, and learn like everyone else. Is that clear?" Sarah felt something shift inside her, a quiet rage she didn't know she possessed. "And if the curriculum is wrong? If we're teaching students incorrect principles that could affect their entire understanding of quantum mechanics?" Dr. Harrison's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Wrong? Because a high school junior says so? Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound?" He walked to the board, where traces of Sarah's equations still lingered despite his erasing. "You know what I see when I look at this? I see a child playing with concepts she barely understands, throwing around advanced terms to feel special. That's not true." Sarah's voice shook slightly. "I can prove everything I've written. The math is sound. The theoretical framework is consistent with experimental data." "Enough." Dr. Harrison slammed his hand on his desk, making her jump. "This stops now, or I'll be forced to take more serious action. Your disruptive behavior is affecting other students' learning. One more outburst like today, and I'll recommend disciplinary action to the administration." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. A disciplinary record could destroy her chances at any university, even with her extraordinary abilities. You can't do that. I haven't done anything wrong." "Haven't you?" He picked up her notebook, which she'd left on her desk in her rush to the board earlier. "Let's see what other revolutionary theories you've been working on instead of focusing on the assigned material." He began flipping through the pages, his expression growing increasingly dark. "That's private." Sarah stood up, reaching for her notebook, but Dr. Harrison held it away from her. "Private? Like the quantum tunneling equations you so proudly displayed today?" His eyes scanned the pages rapidly. "Look at this. Pages and pages of nonsense, all while failing to grasp basic principles. You're not a genius, Miss Chen. You're just a confused young girl who's in over her head." The words echoed in the empty classroom, hanging in the air like poison. Sarah felt tears threatening to form but forced them back. "Please give me my notebook." Dr. Harrison closed it with a snap. "I'll be keeping this for now. Consider it evidence of your ongoing disruption of class." He placed it in his desk drawer and locked it with a decisive click. "Perhaps without your theories to distract you, you'll finally focus on the actual coursework." Sarah stood frozen, watching her months of work disappear into the drawer. All her calculations, her breakthroughs, her careful documentation, locked away by someone who refused to even consider their validity. "You have no right," she whispered. "I have every right," he replied coldly. "I am your teacher, and it's time you learned your place in this classroom. Tomorrow, you will come to class, sit quietly, and pay attention to the lesson as presented. If you can't do that, well," he smiled thinly, "I'm sure the administration will be very interested in hearing about your disruptive behavior and refusal to follow the curriculum." Sarah gathered her remaining belongings with trembling hands. As she reached the door, Dr. Harrison called out one last time. "Oh, and Miss Chen, I'll be giving a special presentation tomorrow on advanced quantum mechanics. I expect you to pay very close attention. Who knows? You might actually learn something about real physics." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah hurried into the hallway, her mind racing. She had backed up most of her work on her computer at home, but the latest calculations, the final pieces of her breakthrough, they were all in that notebook. As she walked home, a plan began to form in her mind. Tomorrow's special presentation was clearly meant to humiliate her, to put her in her place once and for all. But Dr. Harrison had made one crucial mistake. In trying to silence her, he had only strengthened her resolve. Tomorrow would indeed be special, but not in the way he intended. The time for holding back was over. The next morning arrived with an electric tension in the air. Students filed into the physics classroom, their usual chatter subdued by the presence of not just Dr. Harrison, but also Dr. Collins, the head of the science department, and Principal Wagner. They stood at the front of the room, engaged in quiet conversation, while a complex equation spanning 3 whiteboards dominated the wall behind them. Sarah entered last, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. She'd spent the entire night recreating her calculations from memory, preparing for whatever challenge Dr. Harrison had planned. The missing notebook was a wound, but she refused to let it break her. "Ah, Miss Chen." Dr. Harrison's voice carried a note of anticipation that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. "So glad you could join us. I was just explaining to Dr. Collins and Principal Wagner about your unique approach to quantum physics." Sarah took her seat, noting how Marcus and even Amanda were watching the scene unfold with unusual intensity. The equation on the board was far more advanced than anything typically covered in high school physics, a graduate-level problem involving quantum chromodynamics and string theory. "Class," Dr. Harrison began, straightening his tie with deliberate slowness. "Given Miss Chen's repeated assertions about her superior understanding of quantum mechanics, I thought today we might attempt something more challenging." He gestured to the equation. "This is a problem that stumped physicists at CERN for months. Perhaps our resident genius would like to demonstrate her abilities." The trap was obvious, but Sarah felt strangely calm. She'd recognized the equation immediately. It was related to the very field she'd been researching, the area where she'd made her breakthrough. Dr. Harrison had chosen it thinking it would be impossible for her, not knowing he'd accidentally wandered into her specialty. "Miss Chen?" Dr. Harrison's smile was sharp. "The board awaits, unless, of course, you'd prefer to admit that some problems are beyond your current level of understanding." Sarah stood slowly, aware of every eye in the room following her movement. "Actually, Dr. Harrison, I'm quite familiar with this particular problem." She walked to the board, her footsteps echoing in the silent room. "It's from Dr. Zhao's paper on quantum chromodynamics published in Physical Review Letters last year." Dr. Harrison's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected her to recognize the source. "Well then, by all means, enlighten us. Show us how a high school student can solve what challenged CERN's finest minds." Sarah picked up the chalk, its weight familiar in her hand. She began writing, her movements swift and sure. The equations flowed from her like music, each symbol perfectly placed, each step logically connected to the next. She didn't just solve the problem, she expanded it, showing how it connected to her own theoretical framework. "The key," she explained, her voice growing stronger, "isn't in treating the quantum chromodynamic interactions as separate from the string theory implications. If we consider them as part of a unified field." Her chalk moved faster, filling the board with elegant mathematics that made Dr. Collins lean forward with sudden interest. "This is absurd," Dr. Harrison interrupted, his face reddening. You're just writing random equations now. This has nothing to do with the original problem. Actually, Dr. Collins spoke up, adjusting his glasses as he studied Sarah's work. She's onto something quite remarkable here. This approach, it's novel, but the math appears sound. Sarah continued writing, her mind completely clear now. The solution isn't just about solving the original equation. It's about understanding why the problem existed in the first place. See, if we apply this transformation... She added a final set of equations with a flourish, stepping back to reveal how everything connected. The room was absolutely silent. Dr. Collins had moved closer to the board, his expression one of growing amazement. Even Principal Wagner, who likely didn't understand the mathematics, could sense that something extraordinary was happening. This is... Dr. Collins turned to Sarah. Young lady, did you develop this approach yourself? Yes, sir. Sarah met his gaze steadily. It's part of a larger theory I've been working on. Dr. Harrison has my notebook with the complete proof in his desk. Dr. Harrison's face had gone from red to pale. This is ridiculous. She's just a student. She can't possibly... James, doctor. Collins cut him off sharply. I believe we need to see that notebook. With trembling hands, Dr. Harrison unlocked his desk drawer and retrieved Sarah's notebook. Dr. Collins began flipping through it, his eyes widening with each page. This is extraordinary. Principal Wagner, we need to contact the university physics department immediately. This work, it's well beyond graduate level. No! Dr. Harrison's voice cracked. She's disrupting the educational process. She's undermining my authority. She's brilliant, Dr. Collins stated firmly. And we've been failing her. He turned to Sarah. Miss Chen, I apologize for not recognizing your gift sooner. Would you be willing to present your complete theory to the university physics faculty? Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Relief, validation, triumph, but kept her voice steady. Yes, sir. I would like that very much. The bell rang, making everyone jump. As students began gathering their things, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion, Sarah finally allowed herself a small smile. She had done more than solve an equation. She had shattered the barriers that had held her back. Dr. Harrison stood by his desk, his carefully constructed authority in shambles, watching as his colleagues gathered around Sarah, asking questions about her work. In trying to humiliate her, he had instead revealed her genius to those who could actually appreciate it. The defining moment had passed, and nothing would ever be the same. The physics classroom had emptied, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with the residue of what had just transpired. Dr. Harrison sat alone at his desk, staring at the equations that still covered the boards. Sarah's equations. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee mug, now cold and forgotten in the drama of the morning's events. Through the Victorian windows, he could see Sarah in the courtyard below, surrounded by Dr. Collins and several other faculty members. Their animated gestures and eager expressions were visible even from this distance. The morning sun caught her face as she explained something, and for the first time, he saw not an arrogant student, but a brilliant young mind burning with genuine passion. The realization of his mistake crashed over him like a wave. He'd spent months trying to dim that light, to force it into the narrow confines of his curriculum, when he should have been nurturing it. The shame sat heavy in his stomach as he remembered every dismissive comment, every deliberate humiliation. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Principal Wagner stood in the doorway, her expression grave. James, we need to talk. She entered, closing the door behind her. The click seemed to echo in the empty room. What happened today? It's going to have consequences. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I know. The university's physics department is sending representatives this afternoon. They've reviewed photos of Miss Chen's equations and her notebook. Principal Wagner paused, choosing her words carefully. They're calling her work revolutionary. One professor said it could be Nobel Prize material. The words hit him like physical blows. Nobel Prize material. He'd had a potential Nobel laureate in his classroom, and he'd treated her like a nuisance. "I tried to break her," he admitted, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "I saw her talent as a threat to my authority, to my ego." Principal Wagner sat on one of the student desks, her usual formality softening slightly. "Why, James? You've been teaching for 20 years. You've handled gifted students before." Dr. Harrison stood up, walking to the board where Sarah's equations still gleamed in white chalk. "Because she reminded me of myself at her age. The passion, the certainty, the burning desire to push boundaries." He traced one of the symbols with his finger. "I had dreams of revolutionizing physics once. But somewhere along the way, I settled. I became comfortable with mediocrity, with just being good enough." The admission hung in the air between them. Principal Wagner watched as her longtime colleague seemed to age years in moments, the weight of his actions visible in the slump of his shoulders. "When Sarah started challenging the curriculum, pointing out errors, showing me theories I barely understood." He shook his head. "It wasn't just her intelligence that threatened me. It was her courage to pursue truth regardless of the consequences. The courage I lost long ago." Outside, a burst of laughter drew their attention. Sarah was now sitting on a bench with Dr. Collins, her notebook open between them. The older scientist was nodding enthusiastically, his usual reserved demeanor replaced by genuine excitement. "The university wants her to start attending advanced physics seminars immediately," Principal Wagner said. "They're talking about special arrangements, mentorship programs, research opportunities. Everything you should have been helping her achieve." Dr. Harrison sank back into his chair. "Will I be fired?" "That depends." Principal Wagner stood up, straightening her jacket. "The board will meet next week to discuss the situation. But more importantly, what are you going to do about Sarah?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "You have a choice, James. You can let this break you, become the villain in her story, the obstacle she overcame." Principal Wagner moved toward the door. "Or you can learn from it, show her, show all of us, that you're capable of growth, of admitting mistakes, of changing." "Left alone again, Doctor." Harrison turned to his computer. The screen showed his unfinished doctoral thesis from 20 years ago, a document he occasionally opened late at night, remembering his own abandoned dreams. Sarah's equations on the board seemed to mock its simplicity. He began typing an email to Sarah, then deleted it. Words couldn't undo months of cruelty. But as he looked at her work again, really looked at it this time, something stirred in his mind. Questions, ideas, possibilities he hadn't considered in years. Standing up, he began copying her equations into his notebook, not to check them for errors this time, but to understand. Each symbol unlocked memories of his own passion for physics, the joy of discovery he'd forgotten beneath years of routine and resentment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the classroom as Dr. Harrison worked, filling page after page with notes. He wasn't just studying Sarah's theories, he was relearning how to be a student himself. The humility was painful but strangely liberating. Tomorrow, he would face his class again, face Sarah again. The dynamic would be forever changed, but perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. Perhaps he realized it was time for him to do what he should have done months ago, put aside his ego and learn from the extraordinary mind he'd tried so hard to suppress. In trying to maintain his authority, he had lost his way as a teacher, but in losing that battle, he might have found a path back to the physicist he'd once dreamed of becoming. The equations before him weren't just Sarah's triumph. They were an invitation to remember why he'd fallen in love with physics in the first place. The physics classroom looked different in the soft light of early evening. Most students had long since gone home, but Sarah had returned after her meeting with the university representatives to collect some books she'd left behind. She hadn't expected to find Dr. Harrison still there, hunched over her equations, surrounded by open physics journals and hastily scribbled notes. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence was heavy with months of antagonism and the fresh memory of that morning's confrontation. Sarah noticed how tired he looked, his usual pristine appearance somewhat disheveled, his silver hair sticking up where he'd run his hands through it in concentration. "Your work on quantum chromodynamics," he finally said, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "The way you've connected it to string theory, it's not just innovative, it's beautiful." He gestured to the papers spread across his desk. "I've been comparing it to current research. There's nothing like this out there, nothing even close." Sarah stood in the doorway, uncertain. This wasn't the doctor. Harrison, she knew, the dismissive authority figure who'd tried to humiliate her hours earlier. This was something else entirely. "Please," he gestured to a chair near his desk. "I'd like to understand how you arrived at this approach, if you're willing to explain it to me." Sarah hesitated, then slowly moved to take the offered seat. Up close, she could see the equations he'd been studying, not just copying her work but expanding on it, asking questions in the margins, drawing connections she hadn't even considered. "Here," he pointed to a particular section, "you've solved the quantum gravity problem in a way that maintains both quantum mechanical principles and general relativistic constraints. How did you see this connection when so many others missed it?" The genuine curiosity in his voice surprised her. I started thinking about it differently," Sarah began cautiously. "Everyone tries to force quantum mechanics to fit with gravity, or gravity to fit with quantum mechanics. But what if they're both emergent properties of something more fundamental?" Dr. Harrison's eyes widened. He quickly flipped to a clean page in his notebook. "Go on." For the next hour, they talked, really talked, about physics. Sarah explained her theories, and Dr. Harrison asked questions, not to challenge or dismiss, but to understand. His own knowledge, buried under years of teaching basic concepts, began to resurface as they delved deeper into the mathematics. "I was wrong about you, Sarah," he said finally, setting down his pen. "Profoundly, inexcusably wrong. I let my own issues cloud my judgment." Sarah watched as he stood up and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the darkening glass. "I was like you once," he continued, his voice distant, "full of ideas, convinced I could unravel the universe's mysteries. But somewhere along the way I lost that fire. Teaching became a way to hide from my own abandoned dreams." "What happened?" Sarah asked softly, surprised by her own curiosity about this vulnerable version of her former tormentor. Dr. Harrison turned back to face her. "I played it safe. My theories weren't conventional enough, didn't fit neatly into existing frameworks. When faced with resistance, I backed down, chose the security of teaching over the uncertainty of research." He gave a bitter laugh. "And then you showed up in my classroom, refusing to back down, pushing boundaries I'd long since accepted. You were everything I'd failed to be." Sarah absorbed this revelation in silence. The man who'd tried so hard to break her spirit had been broken himself, long ago. "Your equations," he gestured to the board. "They're not just brilliant physics, they're an act of courage. You did what I couldn't, stayed true to your vision despite every obstacle." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "Including the obstacles I placed in your way." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Because you deserve to understand, and because I need to acknowledge what I did." He returned to his desk, picking up one of his journals. "I've already submitted my recommendation to the university physics department. They should fast-track your admission to their advanced research program." Sarah felt her breath catch. "But I'm only 16. Age is irrelevant in the face of genuine genius." He handed her back her notebook, handling it with newfound respect. "The universe doesn't care how old you are, only whether your theories are correct, and yours." He shook his head in amazement. "Yours could change everything." A comfortable silence fell between them as Sarah clutched her notebook, feeling its familiar weight. The evening had grown dark outside, the classroom now lit mainly by the desk lamp, creating a peaceful bubble around them. "Dr. Harrison?" Sarah spoke after a while. "Those questions you wrote in the margins, about the implications for quantum entanglement? I think you might be onto something there." He looked surprised. "Really?" Sarah opened her notebook to a fresh page. Yes. See, if we apply my framework to your question? She began writing, and soon they were both absorbed in the equations. Teacher and student transformed into fellow explorers of the universe's deepest mysteries. As they worked, something shifted in the space between them. The wounds weren't healed, couldn't be healed so quickly. But a bridge had begun to form, built on the foundation of their shared love for physics and the humble recognition of human fallibility. In that moment, they were just two minds reaching for understanding, their previous roles forgotten in the pure joy of discovery. And perhaps that, more than any equation, was the real breakthrough of the day. The university conference room felt worlds away from Sarah's high school physics classroom. Gleaming mahogany tables stretched the length of the room, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the prestigious physics building's courtyard. 6 distinguished professors sat before her, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity as they reviewed her work. Dr. Harrison sat quietly in the corner, a silent supporter rather than an adversary now. The change in their dynamic over the past week had been dramatic, but today wasn't about their relationship. It was about Sarah's theories finally reaching the audience they deserved. Miss Chen, Professor Elizabeth Winters, the head of the theoretical physics department, adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. Your approach to quantum chromodynamics is unprecedented. We've had our best graduate students and postdocs review your work, and none of them can find any significant flaws in your mathematics. Sarah's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, but her voice remained steady. The mathematics is solid, Dr. Winters. I've triple-checked every derivation, and Dr. Harrison has verified the calculations independently. Dr. Harrison nodded from his corner, and Sarah caught a glimpse of what might have been pride in his eyes. Strange how the man who had once been her biggest obstacle had become an unexpected ally. Professor James Kumar, a renowned string theorist, leaned forward. What's particularly fascinating is how your theory bridges the gap between quantum mechanics and general relativity. The implications for our understanding of the universe are, well, they're staggering. He paused, sharing a meaningful look with his colleagues. Which brings us to why we've asked you here today. Sarah felt her heart rate quicken. This was more than just a review of her work. They had something specific in mind. We're preparing a major research initiative, Dr. Winters continued, funded by both the National Science Foundation and CERN. It's aimed at exactly the kind of theoretical breakthrough you've begun to develop here. She smiled for the first time. We'd like to offer you a position as a special research fellow. The words hung in the air for a moment as Sarah processed their meaning. But I'm still in high school, she said, though even as she spoke, she knew that traditional educational boundaries no longer applied to her situation. Age is irrelevant in the face of genuine innovation, Professor Kumar replied, unknowingly echoing Dr. Harrison's words from a week ago. Einstein was publishing groundbreaking papers in his early 20s. Wolfgang Pauli made significant contributions to quantum theory as a university student. You're younger, yes, but your work speaks for itself. The fellowship would be tailored to your unique situation, Dr. Winters explained, opening a folder. You'd complete your high school requirements through an accelerated program while simultaneously working with our research team. We'd provide full funding, access to our computational resources, and direct mentorship from faculty members. Sarah's mind raced with the possibilities. This was everything she'd dreamed of, a chance to pursue her theories with proper support and resources. But she could also sense the weight of responsibility that would come with such an opportunity. There's more, Professor Kumar added. CERN has expressed interest in your work. If your theories continue to develop as promisingly as they have, you could be invited to present at their next major conference. This could be the beginning of something truly revolutionary, Miss Chen. Sarah glanced at Dr. Harrison, who gave her an encouraging nod. How strange that she would look to him for support now after everything. But their shared love of physics had forged an unexpected bridge between them, transforming their relationship from adversaries to collaborators. The position would start immediately, Dr. Winters continued. We've already spoken with your parents and the school administration. Everyone agrees this is an extraordinary opportunity that shouldn't be delayed by conventional academic timelines. My parents? Sarah asked, surprised. Her mother and father had always supported her love of physics, even when they didn't understand it, but this was beyond anything they'd imagined. They're very proud, Dr. Harrison spoke up for the first time. Your father said, and I quote, "Finally, someone else sees what we've always known about our daughter." Sarah felt tears threatening to form, but held them back. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was validation for every sacrifice her parents had made, every extra shift they'd worked to support her education. There is one condition, Professor Kumar added, his expression growing serious. Given the potentially groundbreaking nature of your work, we'll need your full commitment. This isn't just an academic opportunity. It's a chance to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Are you ready for that level of responsibility? Sarah sat straighter in her chair. Professor Kumar, Dr. Winters, everyone, physics isn't just something I study. It's how I see the world. Every equation, every theory, every calculation is part of my attempt to understand the fundamental nature of reality. She gestured to her work spread out before them. This isn't just mathematics to me. It's a glimpse into the deepest mysteries of the universe. I'm not just ready for this responsibility. I've been preparing for it my entire life. The conviction in her voice seemed to resonate with the assembled professors. Dr. Winters smiled broadly, while Professor Kumar nodded in approval. Well then, Dr. Winters stood, extending her hand. Welcome to the University of Cambridge Physics Department, Special Research Fellow Chen. As Sarah shook her hand, she realized this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a door opening to a future she'd always dreamed of, but never quite believed possible. The equation-filled notebooks in her bag suddenly felt lighter, as if their contents were finally finding their proper home in the world of serious theoretical physics. The universe, it seemed, had bigger plans for the girl who dared to challenge not just her teacher, but the very foundations of physics itself. The university laboratory hummed with energy as banks of computers processed Sarah's latest calculations. 3 months into her fellowship, she had settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible just a short time ago. The pristine white walls were now covered with whiteboards filled with her equations, and her dedicated workstation was surrounded by scientific journals and reference materials. The quantum field simulations are showing remarkable consistency, Professor Kumar announced, studying the latest results on his tablet. Sarah, your predictions about particle behavior at the quantum level are being validated by our computational models. This is extraordinary. Sarah looked up from her own work, dark circles under her eyes betraying the long hours she'd been putting in. Her workspace had become a second home, complete with a small electric kettle for late-night tea and a collection of physics books that would rival many graduate students' libraries. The real test will be the experimental data from CERN, she replied, pushing her glasses up her nose. They're running the particle accelerator tests next week based on our parameters. If the results match our predictions... She left the sentence hanging, the implications too enormous to voice. Dr. Harrison, who had taken a partial sabbatical from teaching to work with the research team, approached with fresh printouts. The preliminary numbers from Geneva are promising. Your theory about quantum entanglement's relationship to gravitational fields is already generating buzz in the theoretical physics community. Sarah smiled at her former adversary, now one of her strongest supporters. Their shared dedication to unlocking the universe's mysteries had transformed their relationship into something neither could have predicted. He had become both a mentor and a colleague, their past conflicts forgotten in the excitement of discovery. "Miss Chen," a voice called from the doorway. Dr. Winters entered, holding what appeared to be a scientific journal. "Have you seen the latest issue of Physical Review Letters? They're running a feature on your work." Sarah accepted the journal with trembling hands. Seeing her theories discussed in such a prestigious publication made it all feel more real somehow. The article was titled, "Revolutionary Approach to Quantum Gravity. Teenage Prodigy Challenges Fundamental Physics." "They're calling you the next Einstein," Professor Kumar remarked, peering over her shoulder at the article. "Though personally, I think they're underselling it. Einstein didn't have to balance high school homework with groundbreaking physics research. Sarah laughed, but it was tinged with exhaustion. The accelerated program allowing her to complete her high school requirements while conducting research was intense, requiring careful time management and long hours. But she wouldn't have it any other way. Speaking of balance, Dr. Harrison interjected, noting her fatigue. When was the last time you took a break? Even brilliant minds need rest, Sarah. She was about to protest when her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. How's my favorite physics revolutionary? Still coming to my basketball game Friday? It was a reminder that somewhere out there, her old life continued. She had promised to maintain connections to her high school friends, to not let her work consume everything. He's right, Dr. Winters said, glancing at the message over Sarah's shoulder. The equations will still be here tomorrow. Go home, get some rest. We have a big week ahead with the CERN tests. Sarah nodded reluctantly, beginning to gather her things. As she packed up, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the lab's windows. She looked different now, more confident, more focused, but also more weathered by the weight of her work's implications. Before you go, Professor Kumar called out, there's something else we need to discuss. He handed her an envelope bearing the CERN logo. They want you to present your findings at the International Conference on Quantum Physics next month, in person, in Geneva. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the letter. But that's the biggest conference in the field. Nobel laureates attend this. And now they'll be attending to hear you speak, Dr. Harrison said softly. You've earned this, Sarah. Your work isn't just theoretical anymore, it's changing how we understand the fundamental nature of reality. The weight of the invitation seemed to make the room spin slightly. Sarah sank into her chair, memories of her old physics classroom flooding back. How far she had come from the girl who had been told to stay quiet and accept the curriculum. We'll help you prepare, Doctor, Winters assured her, sensing her overwhelm. You won't be alone in this. The entire department stands behind you. Sarah looked around the lab, at the equations that had become her language, at the mentors who had become her allies, at the computers processing theories that had once existed only in her mind. This was more than just personal validation. It was proof that truth and persistence could overcome any obstacle. Thank you, she said finally, her voice steady despite her emotion. All of you, for believing in me, for giving me this chance. You gave yourself this chance, Dr. Harrison corrected gently. We just finally got out of your way and let you soar. As Sarah finally left the lab that evening, the sunset painted the university buildings in shades of gold. She paused to watch it, remembering all the nights she had stayed up studying, all the times she had been dismissed or doubted. The universe, it seemed, had a way of vindicating those who refused to give up on their dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the CERN tests, preparation for the conference, continuing research that could revolutionize physics. But for now, Sarah Chen, the girl who had dared to challenge her teacher and ended up challenging the very foundations of physics, allowed herself a moment to simply breathe and appreciate how far she had come. The CERN auditorium in Geneva buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of the world's leading physicists filled the seats, their quiet murmurs creating a symphony of different languages and accents. At the podium, Sarah Chen took a deep breath, acutely aware that this moment would define not just her future, but potentially the future of physics itself. The familiar faces of her support team sat in the front row. Dr. Harrison, Professor Kumar, and Dr. Winters had all flown in from Cambridge for this presentation. Behind them, she spotted her parents, who looked both proud and slightly bewildered by the prestigious surroundings. Her mother had taken time off from her hospital shifts, and her father had postponed several important business meetings to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, the CERN director began, today we gather to witness something unprecedented. The results of our latest particle acceleration tests, conducted based on theoretical work by our youngest ever visiting researcher, Sarah Chen. Miss Chen's theories about quantum chromodynamics and its relationship to gravitational fields have already created significant discussion in the theoretical physics community. Today, We will see if experimental evidence supports these revolutionary ideas. Sarah stepped forward, her presentation ready on the massive screen behind her. The equations she'd worked on for so many months now faced their ultimate test. The particle acceleration data would either validate or invalidate everything she'd proposed. "Thank you, Director," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. For decades, physics has struggled with a fundamental problem: the incompatibility between quantum mechanics and general relativity. Today, I believe we have not just a theoretical solution, but experimental evidence to support it. The lights dimmed as she launched into her presentation. Slide after slide showed her mathematical framework, each equation building upon the last like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. The audience leaned forward in their seats, renowned physicists scribbling notes furiously. "The key insight," Sarah continued, reaching the crucial part of her presentation, "isn't in trying to force quantum mechanics to comply with gravity, or vice versa. Instead, we need to recognize them as emergent properties of a more fundamental underlying principle." She clicked to the next slide, revealing the particle accelerator data. Gasps echoed through the auditorium as the experimental results appeared alongside her theoretical predictions. The correlation was undeniable. Her equations had precisely predicted particle behavior that existing theories couldn't explain. As you can see, her confidence growing with each word, the experimental data matches our theoretical predictions with a significance of 5 sigma. The quantum tunneling effects we observed demonstrate exactly the kind of unified behavior our equations suggested. A hand shot up from the audience. It belonged to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a Nobel laureate known for her skepticism of new theories. "Miss Chen, these results are remarkable, but how do you explain the apparent violation of the uncertainty principle at these energy levels?" Sarah felt a moment of déjà vu, remembering similar challenges in her high school classroom. But this time was different. She was prepared, confident, and had data to support her claims. "An excellent question, Dr. Rodriguez," Sarah responded, switching to a detailed diagram. "What appears to be a violation is actually a manifestation of the underlying symmetry our theory predicts. If you look at the phase space calculations." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah handled question after question from the world's leading physicists. Each challenge was met with clear, precise explanations backed by both mathematical proof and experimental data. Dr. Harrison watched from the front row, tears in his eyes, as his former student commanded the attention of the entire physics community. Finally, the CERN director returned to the podium. "The results speak for themselves," he announced. "Miss Chen's work represents not just an incremental advance, but a potential paradigm shift in our understanding of the universe's fundamental laws. The implications for physics, for our understanding of space, time, and reality itself, are profound." Sarah felt a wave of emotion as applause filled the auditorium. Years of work, of being dismissed and doubted, had led to this moment. She caught Dr. Harrison's eye, and he nodded, his expression saying everything words couldn't. As the formal presentation ended, Sarah found herself surrounded by physicists eager to discuss her work. Nobel laureates who had initially seemed skeptical now treated her as a peer, engaging in detailed discussions about the implications of her theory. "Sarah," her mother called out, finally managing to reach her through the crowd. Her eyes were wet with tears. "Your father and we didn't understand most of what you said, but we understood that look on everyone's faces. You did it, didn't you? You really did it." Sarah hugged her parents tightly, remembering all the nights they'd heard her working late, all the sacrifices they'd made to support her dreams. "We did it," she corrected her mother. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Dr. Harrison approached, holding a copy of her paper now filled with enthusiastic notes from other physicists. "Well, Miss Chen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it seems you've done more than solve an equation. You've changed physics forever." Sarah looked around the auditorium, at the excited discussions taking place in every corner, at the equations on the screen that had once existed only in her mind, at the people who had supported her and those who had doubted her. This wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a victory for every person who had ever dared to question established wisdom in pursuit of truth. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for someone brave enough to see it in a new way, and that someone had turned out to be a 16-year-old girl who refused to stay quiet in physics class. Time seemed to accelerate after the CERN presentation. Sarah's life transformed so rapidly that sometimes she had to remind herself that just months ago, she had been fighting for recognition in a high school physics classroom. Now, at 17, she found herself navigating a world that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. The headline in Scientific American read, "Physics prodigy Sarah Chen becomes youngest recipient of the Wolf Prize in Physics." The prestigious award was just the latest in a series of accolades that had followed her breakthrough at CERN. Her theory, now known as the Chen-Kumar framework, she had insisted on including Professor Kumar's name for his mentorship, was revolutionizing the field of theoretical physics. Sarah stood at the window of her new office at Cambridge University, where she had been given an unprecedented position as a special research fellow with her own laboratory. The Gothic spires of the ancient institution stretched toward the cloudy English sky, a far cry from her cramped bedroom where she had first sketched out her theories. "Your new paper on quantum entanglement is causing quite a stir," Dr. Harrison said, entering with a stack of journals. He had taken a permanent position at Cambridge to continue their collaboration, his own passion for theoretical physics rekindled by their work together. "The quantum computing team at MIT wants to build their new system based on your principles." Sarah smiled, remembering how far they'd both come from their adversarial beginning. "Have you seen the latest simulation results?" she asked, pulling up complex visualizations on her computer. "The quantum behavior predictions are matching our theoretical framework with unprecedented accuracy." "Dr. Chen?" A young voice interrupted them. A group of high school students stood at her door, part of Cambridge's outreach program for gifted young scientists. Sarah had insisted on being involved in the program, remembering her own journey. "Come in," she welcomed them warmly. The students entered hesitantly, their eyes wide as they took in the whiteboards covered in complex equations. Sarah recognized the look in their eyes, the same hunger for knowledge she had felt at their age. "Is it true?" one girl asked, clutching her notebook. "That you made your breakthrough while you were still in high school?" Sarah exchanged a knowing look with Dr. Harrison before answering. "Yes, but what's more important is that I didn't let anyone convince me I was wrong just because I was young. Science doesn't care about age, it only cares about truth." As she spoke with the students, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages. The Nobel Committee wanted to schedule her interview. CERN was requesting her presence for their next major experiment. Harvard, MIT, and Stanford were all offering her honorary degrees. The demands of her new life were constant, but she had learned to balance them with what truly mattered. Later that afternoon, Sarah visited the university's main physics lecture hall, where she occasionally gave guest lectures. The same room where giants like Newton and Hawking had once taught, now regularly filled to capacity for her presentations. But today, she was there for a different reason. "The key to understanding quantum gravity," Dr. Harrison was saying to his undergraduate class, "lies in the principles first proposed by Dr. Chen." He gestured to the equations on the board, the same equations Sarah had once tried to share in his high school class. "These insights have transformed our understanding of the universe." Sarah slipped quietly into the back of the hall, watching her former teacher share her work with a new generation of physicists. The scene struck her as beautifully poetic. The man who had once tried to silence her now championed her theories to the world. After class, they walked together through the historic corridors of Cambridge. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Sarah admitted. "Last year at this time I was worried about high school exams. Now I'm helping design experiments at CERN." "You've handled it all with remarkable grace," Dr. Harrison observed. "Many would have let such rapid success go to their heads. But you've stayed focused on what matters, the science itself." They reached the courtyard where Sarah had first arrived at Cambridge, nervous and uncertain despite her breakthrough. Now she walked these grounds with confidence, her contributions to physics already secured in history books. I received an interesting email today, Sarah said, stopping by the ancient tree that had witnessed centuries of scientific discoveries. Amanda, you remember her from high school? She's studying physics in college now. Said I inspired her to give science another chance. Dr. Harrison smiled. You've inspired more people than you know. The number of young women applying to physics programs has doubled since your work made headlines. Sarah felt the weight of this responsibility, but it no longer frightened her. She had learned to embrace her role not just as a scientist, but as a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized and nurtured rather than suppressed. We should head back, she said, checking her watch. The quantum computing team is waiting for our video conference, and then I need to finish my paper for physical review letters. As they walked back to her laboratory, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in a window, no longer the uncertain teenager fighting for recognition, but a confident young scientist whose work was changing our understanding of the universe. The transformation wasn't just in her circumstances, it was in how she carried herself, how she approached challenges, how she saw her place in the world. The equations that had once been her escape had become her path to changing the world, and this was only the beginning. 10 years had passed since Sarah Chen's breakthrough at CERN. The autumn leaves scattered across the Cambridge University grounds as she walked toward the newly constructed Chen Institute for Quantum Physics, a state-of-the-art research facility funded by her Nobel Prize money. At 27, she had accomplished more than most scientists did in a lifetime, yet her passion for unlocking the universe's mysteries remained as strong as ever. The Institute's glass and steel architecture contrasted beautifully with Cambridge's historic buildings, much like how Sarah's revolutionary theories had built upon classical physics. Inside, dozens of researchers worked on various aspects of her unified field theory, which had spawned entire new branches of physics and technological innovation. Dr. Chen, her assistant called out as she entered the building, the quantum computing team from Google is waiting in the conference room, and NASA just confirmed they want to implement your gravity wave detection system in their next deep space mission. Sarah nodded, adjusting her glasses, the same style she'd worn in high school, now something of a trademark. The walls of the Institute's lobby displayed headlines marking her journey. Teenage prodigy revolutionizes physics. Chen becomes youngest Nobel laureate in history. Quantum computing breakthrough based on Chen framework. As she passed the educational wing, she paused to watch a group of young students working with Dr. Harrison, who now headed the Institute's outreach program. At 70, his hair had turned completely white, but his eyes still sparkled with the same enthusiasm for physics that had been rekindled during their journey together. Remember, he was saying to the students, age doesn't matter in science. Some of you might be sitting on the next breakthrough just like Dr. Chen was at your age. He caught sight of her and smiled warmly. Their relationship had evolved into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared passion for discovery. In her private office, Sarah took a moment to look at the photos on her desk. There she was at CERN a decade ago, nervous but determined. Another showed her accepting the Nobel Prize, her parents beaming in the audience. A recent one captured her with Stephen Hawking's family, accepting the medal named in his honor. But her favorite was the oldest, a simple picture of her at 16 standing in her high school physics classroom. Your 2 o'clock appointment is here, her assistant announced through the intercom. The high school student you agreed to meet? Sarah smiled, remembering why she'd scheduled this particular meeting. Send her in, please. A young girl entered, clutching a worn notebook much like Sarah had once carried. Her eyes widened as she took in the office, with its whiteboards covered in complex equations and the holographic display showing quantum particle simulations. Welcome to the Institute, Emma. Sarah greeted her warmly. Dr. Harrison told me about your theories on quantum entanglement. I'd love to hear them. Emma Thompson, 15, looked exactly as Sarah had felt in Dr. Harrison's classroom. Brilliant, nervous, and burning with ideas that needed to be heard. But they go against several established principles, Emma said hesitantly. My physics teacher says they're impossible. Sarah laughed softly. Impossible? Let me tell you a story about impossible theories in a high school physics classroom. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. 10 years ago, I was told the same thing. But here's what I learned. Science advances when we dare to question what everyone else takes for granted. As Emma began explaining her ideas, Sarah recognized the same spark she'd had, that unique combination of brilliance and determination that could change the world. The equations in Emma's notebook were rough but promising, showing an innovative approach to quantum mechanics that even Sarah hadn't considered. Later that evening, after the institute had quieted, Sarah stood at her office window watching the sunset. On her desk lay a draft of her latest book, The Universe Within, a journey from high school physics to the Nobel Prize. The publisher had insisted on the personal angle, arguing that her story could inspire a new generation of scientists. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, still a close friend after all these years. He was now a physics teacher himself, inspired by witnessing her journey. "Remember when you were just the quiet girl in physics class?" his message read. "Now my students study your equations in textbooks. Wild." Sarah smiled, remembering that time that felt both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. She thought about how many things had changed, how Dr. Harrison had transformed from an obstacle to a mentor and friend, how her parents had gone from worried about her future to proudly displaying her achievements, how the physics community had shifted from skepticism to celebration of her work. The holographic display in her office showed the latest data from CERN, where experiments based on her theories were still revealing new aspects of the universe. Each discovery built upon her original insight. That moment in a high school classroom when she dared to suggest that something in the textbook might be wrong. On her desk, next to all the awards and honors, sat a small piece of chalk. She kept it as a reminder of that pivotal day when she solved the impossible equation, the day that marked the beginning of her journey. It reminded her that breakthrough moments could come at any time, from anyone brave enough to challenge conventional wisdom. The sun set over Cambridge, casting long shadows across the historic campus. In labs around the world, scientists were working with her theories, building upon them, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge even further. And somewhere out there, other young minds like Emma were beginning their own journeys of discovery. Sarah Chen, the girl who had once been told to stay quiet and accept the curriculum, had not only changed physics, she had changed what was possible for everyone who dared to think differently. The Preston Academy auditorium buzzed with excitement as hundreds of students, teachers, and distinguished guests gathered for a very special occasion. 20 years had passed since a teenage Sarah Chen had stood up to challenge her physics teacher in a classroom just down the hall. Now, at 37, she returned not just as a Nobel laureate or the world's leading theoretical physicist, but as living proof that extraordinary dreams could become reality. Dr. Harrison, now retired but still sharp as ever, sat in the front row. His hair had turned snow white, but his eyes sparkled with the same intensity they had when he'd first realized the true magnitude of Sarah's genius. Next to him sat Sarah's parents, who had watched their daughter transform from a determined teenager into a figure who had fundamentally changed humanity's understanding of the universe. "It is my great honor," Principal Wagner's successor announced, "to dedicate the Sarah Chen Center for Scientific Excellence." The newly constructed building, visible through the auditorium's windows, would serve as an advanced research facility for gifted high school students, a place where young minds could pursue their theories without fear of being silenced. Sarah approached the podium, her presence commanding yet humble. Time had added wisdom to her brilliance, and experience had taught her that the most important discoveries often came from unexpected places or people. 20 years ago, in a classroom not far from here, she began, I was told to stay quiet, to accept what the textbooks said, to stop questioning established theories. She paused, sharing a knowing smile with Dr. Harrison. Fortunately for physics, I didn't listen. Laughter rippled through the audience. Among them sat Emma Thompson, now a promising young professor herself, whose theories on quantum entanglement had built upon Sarah's work. In the decade since their first meeting, she had become one of many who had found their voice through Sarah's example. But this story isn't just about physics, Sarah continued. It's about the courage to stand up for truth, even when every voice of authority tells you you're wrong. It's about the power of young minds to see what others have missed. And most importantly, it's about the responsibility we have to nurture rather than suppress that potential. The Chen Institute's quantum research network now spanned the globe, connecting brilliant minds across continents. The Chen-Kumar framework had spawned technological advances that transformed everything from computing to space exploration. But for Sarah, this moment, creating a space where young scientists could freely pursue their ideas, felt like her most important achievement. Dr. Harrison, she gestured to her former teacher, taught me something invaluable, though perhaps not in the way he initially intended. More laughter, including from Harrison himself. He taught me that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come when we dare to challenge what everyone accepts as true. Today we're creating a space where that challenge is not just allowed, but encouraged. As she spoke, Sarah noticed a young girl in the audience, maybe 14, scribbling equations in her notebook instead of watching the ceremony. The sight made her smile. Some things never changed. That same fire, that same passion for understanding the universe's deepest mysteries, would always find new minds to inhabit. The universe, Sarah concluded, doesn't care about age or authority or established wisdom. It reveals its secrets to those who dare to question, who persist in the face of doubt, who follow the math wherever it leads. This center will be a place for those questioners, those dreamers, those who might just change everything we think we know. After the ceremony, Sarah walked the halls of her old school with Dr. Harrison. The physics classroom where their story had begun was now a state-of-the-art laboratory, but the fundamental questions that had driven her remained the same. What is the nature of reality? How does the universe work? What don't we yet understand? Did you ever imagine, Dr. Harrison asked, that day when you challenged my equation that we'd end up here? Sarah smiled, remembering the frightened but determined teenager she had been. Actually, I was too busy worrying about getting in trouble to imagine anything else. But life has a way of exceeding our imaginations, doesn't it? They stopped at a wall displaying photos of young scientists who had already made breakthroughs at the Chen Institute. Each face shone with the same determination Sarah had once shown, each discovery built upon her legacy of questioning the accepted and pursuing truth. Your greatest contribution, Dr. Harrison said softly, isn't just your theories about the universe. It's showing others that they have the right to question, to challenge, to push boundaries. You've changed more than physics, Sarah. You've changed how we nurture brilliant minds. As they stood there, a group of students rushed past, energetically discussing quantum mechanics. Their excitement, their passion, their fearlessness in tackling the universe's biggest questions. This was Sarah's true legacy. She had done more than solve an equation or win awards. She had helped create a world where the next brilliant insight could come from anyone brave enough to challenge conventional wisdom. The universe, vast and mysterious as ever, still held countless secrets waiting to be discovered. But thanks to a teenage girl who refused to stay quiet in physics class, a new generation of scientists now had the freedom and support to seek those secrets, knowing that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from those bold enough to say, I think there might be another way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.